Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of your Bish Therapist podcast. I am your host, Melissa Reich, your Bish Therapist, a real-life therapist turned pop culture aficionado, serving clinical interpretations and hot takes on all things pop culture. Today's episode is going to be about Gypsy Rose Blanchard. For those of you who don't know about Gypsy Rose, I am going to give a complete outline of the situation that happened, everything that it entails. This case fascinated so many people because of the wild nature of it used to be called Munchausen Syndrome by proxy. It is now called something else. So to be honest, this whole thing fascinates me. So as a 2-time cancer survivor, I know a lot about medical stuff, and it's always interesting to me. This type of stuff has always fascinated me. The Munchausen Syndrome by proxy. I have so many medical issues. Sometimes people think that I have Munchausen syndrome, and I say I wish that were true because that would probably be easier to treat than 145 medical issues. So the concept has always really intrigued me. It is a wild, wild story, and I'm very passionate about the psychology behind it. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a description of what happened for those of you who didn't watch or don't know. Specifically, I will be referencing there was a documentary done across 18 months called The Prison Confessions of Gypsy Rose. So this group of people, they filmed her over 18 months and did all of these interviews with family members outside of prison, with her inside of prison, and it also outlined her parole, which she got earlier than expected. And, many of you know she's out now. She is married. She is living with her husband. She is on social media. She posts something, and in like 2 minutes, there's like 2 million likes. It's a lot. And I think it is extremely complex. I have a lot to say about it. So let's get into it. Before we do that, I do want to just say I'm going to start promoting myself at the top of the hour because at the end, people just click and they're done. So please follow me on Instagram, Your Bish Therapist. Please head over to my YouTube if you'd like to, for those of you who are listening to this via podcast, there is also full video available on YouTube at Your Bish Therapist. And if you are enjoying the podcast, please go over and give me a 5-star review anywhere you listen to podcasts. Okay, thank you. Plug's done. Now, the first thing that I want to say before getting into Gypsy Rose is that I appreciate all the feedback that I received about my Paris in Love episodes. So at this point, there are 2 of those episodes out, and I have gotten so many messages from people that were thanking me for, some of the things that I said that really helped them feel validated and heard. I got some messages from folks who had relatives in camps like that and who talked about how their family were manipulated as well. And so, I'm always continuing to be surprised by the reach of this podcast. I kind of talk to myself for an hour and then I post it, and, I get my numbers and stuff. So I know people are listening, but I don't know. It's easy cognitive dissonance, I suppose, that I'm just talking to myself and I'm like, oh yeah, people are listening to me. Okay. But for those of you who sent me messages, please know I've read them. I appreciate them. And truly, I am just grateful that I have a platform that I can do a little bit of good. And that is my goal. So I appreciate that. The one thing I do want to add about Paris before we move on, because I didn't want to do a whole other episode on it. I've already done 2. The one thing I never really addressed is Paris keeping her son a secret from everybody for a couple of days. So I'm going to try to be mindful of about how I talk about this. There are some podcasts and some folks out there who, don't really have an understanding of psychology, but people think sometimes that psychology or armchair psychology is just easy, and it isn't. It's really complex, and it does require a lot of not only education, but also real life experience. Because as I talked about in my last podcast, reading about how to do therapy versus actually doing it can be two different things. And so I just want to be really clear that psychology is not just something that is easily discerned or determined or understood. And so I've kind of heard some theories about this, Paris stuff and why she did this. And so I kind of wanted to speak to that because I think some of the information is inaccurate that I've been hearing. And here's the thing. Here's what I'm going to say. Within psychology, there are so many different theoretical frameworks, meaning from the beginning of time, from Freud and beyond, humans have always wondered why do we do the things that we do, right? Psychology and sociology, the understanding of individuals and groups has been, since the dawn of time, really, really debated. And all these great people have come up with these theoretical frameworks, and ultimately we all have a lens from which we view the world, whether it's a behavioral lens or a cognitive lens or, a psychoanalytic lens. And so the theoretical framework that we move from, it infers our perspective, right? It tells us how we want to look at this behavior, right? And so what I'm trying to say is that there are different ways at looking at one behavior, right? There's different interpretations, there's different theoretical frameworks, and I'm, to be clear, not saying that I'm right either, right? I am a human being who has my own lenses and my own theoretical frameworks and my own experiences that help me see things the way that I see them. So I'm not saying that I am totally correct. Everyone is welcome to have a different opinion about why Paris did this. It's just some of the opinions that I've heard are definitely, I think sometimes people like to think they have more of a knowledge about psychology than they do. I'm just going to say that. I'm trying to keep it really diplomatic here, but I think y'all can understand what I'm saying. So here's my thought on Paris keeping everything a secret, and why I support her doing that. When your life and body have not been your own, you want your own privacy and control over all you have, which is your body and yourself. Okay. So Paris, as I outlined in the last 2 episodes, if you didn't listen, it'll make more sense if you do, but she had endured a lot of abuse, trauma, sexual, physical, emotional, just all of it. And for a lot of folks who have had sexual abuse, pregnancy or bringing a child into the world can be very triggering for 1,000,001 reasons. Okay. So Paris choosing what she chose, I believe, is a trauma response, but also a healthy realization that, like, Paris's life has been completely not her own. It hasn't been. Between the teen wilderness camps that she was sent to, and now she has such a celebrity that, when you're a Paris Hilton level celebrity, your life is not your own. You can't just walk down the street. You can't just go to CVS. Like, you can't just, whatever. So, and as I explained in the last 2 episodes, I think that's a trauma response. But my point is her life and her body hasn't been her own, and she wanted something just for her and her partner, Carter. And I think that she has more than earned the right to bring a child into the world how she feels is best for her family, number one. And number two, to keep it private. Now, the last thing I'm going to say about this before I move on to Gypsy Rose is that I was really proud of Paris. The last scene in the last episode of Paris in Love was Paris talking to her mom about, Kathy initially said, I would be really hurt if I wasn't involved with your next child. And I will give Paris endless amounts of credit. She heard it and she said it was a master class in how to draw a boundary. And I don't even know if Paris recognized that she did it, but she just explained to her mom, listen, this is why this is important to me. And this is something that I do still want to just keep for us. That's really important to me. And, Kathy, to her credit, said, okay, I get it. She doesn't love it, but she doesn't have to love it. You just have to respect the boundary. So I give both Paris and Kathy credit for that. And quite frankly, reproduction and children, it's, societally, it's really none of people's business. And it's just been so, there's so many women out there who are listening to this that are like, ugh, yes. The comments that they get about their bodies and about their child and about this and about that. It's like, just time, let people live, let them be. And this is between Paris and her family, and they've talked about it and they've worked it out. So guess what? It has nothing to do with, Paris holding anything against Kathy, in my opinion. And I don't believe that, because if Paris was still holding things against Kathy, she would not probably speak to her, because there, as I mentioned in the last couple episodes, there's been so much that has happened with this family. So that is my 2 cents on it. I think that if you're a survivor of abuse and trauma, how you need to protect your privacy is very important. And boundaries are really great and important. So that's all I wanted to say about that. Okay, now moving on to Gypsy Rose. So I will start out by giving an outline for those who didn't watch or aren't familiar with the situation. I'm going to kind of let you know the players and some of the background information, and then do a lot of talking about Munchausen Syndrome, Factitious Disorder, Malingering, and all that stuff, just because, again, I'm a psychology nerd and it's a passion for me. Okay, so the first thing that I'll outline is the people who were interviewed in this were Rod and Christy Blanchard. So Rod Blanchard was married to Gypsy's mother. Her name is DeeDee. She has a name like it's not Deandra. It's something similar to that. But anyway, they call her DeeDee, and that's what I'm going to call her too. So Rod and DeeDee were young when they conceived Gypsy Rose, and so they divorced, or I don't know. I don't think that they ever married, but they ended their relationship when Gypsy Rose was very young. And Rod, listen, what I give this man credit for in these interviews is he is admitted he was not there as much as he should have been. He trusted DeeDee. He thought that she was taking great care of Gypsy, and, he gave her a lot of credit because, he was like having a hard time. He was like as involved as he could be, but DeeDee, in cases like this, you're always going to see some sort of alienation, because you can't fake illness with a lot of folks around who are there to witness or call you on things. So DeeDee knew what she was doing. But to Rod's credit is that he just knew that he had made a mistake, and he and his new wife have been a really important part of Gypsy's life. And I'm going to talk about that more, when she was let out of prison, and I guess, is it being called discharged? I'm not sure. I'm like trying to think of it from a mental health perspective. When she was released, I guess, from prison. Released is the proper word. And, they seem really sweet and they seem really loving and they seem to just take ownership of, I'm so sorry we weren't, there, and I want to be here now. They just seem like wonderful people, is just what I'm trying to say. I give them a lot of credit, because to realize that you didn't protect your child in the way that you needed to as an adult is really hard to swallow. And so to be able to say, yes, this is what happened. I'm taking ownership of it. I'm apologizing for it, and I'm going to make up for lost time. I just think that's really, really special. So, good for them. The other people who were interviewed was, of course, Gypsy Rose. She was in most of the interviews. I'll get to her in a second. There were some of her doctors that were interviewed, which I thought was really, really important, because every single doctor and system failed this girl, like sincerely, every system. Children and youth, or, whatever it's called in Louisiana, which is where they were living. Law enforcement, doctors, everybody failed this child. And I think, now we can realize that. And so these doctors, it was very interesting seeing them being interviewed, because one of them seemed to have a lot more empathy than the other, but you can tell one of them, his name was Dr. Robert Steele. He realized she had 3 different birthdays, and he knew something was going on. Now, he claimed that he called children and youth, and he told DeeDee that he was the one that called. But Gypsy claims this never happened. And so, it's one of those things where these doctors are saying, well, here's what I did. And Gypsy is saying, I don't recall this. This never happened. And so I think what is happening here is there's a mix of, this doctor in particular, Dr. Robert Steele, said, I'm sorry, I failed you. He actually looked like he was tearful as he said that, which I appreciate, because listen, we all make mistakes. Healthcare practitioners make mistakes all the time. I think it's just about learning and growing and owning up to that. And, I appreciated that he did that. The other doctor, Dr. Flasterstein, he's a neurologist. He said that he didn't. Okay, this is what irritates me about this. And please forgive me, because I am jumping all over the place today. It's been a very stressful week for me. And for those of you who don't follow me on Instagram, I do kind of share some personal stuff on there. So it's just been a week. So I do apologize if I'm kind of jumping around a bit. But Dr. Flasterstein, he didn't call family services. He said, because you can't report suspicions. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. So what I'm going to be really clear about is, if you are concerned that there is something happening to a child, we always need to say and do something. Okay. The excuse of you can't report suspicions. You're a doctor. Yes, you can. I think that was a cop-out, and I didn't like it. So my point is that, I've kind of said this before in other podcasts, is that if you see something, as human beings, we have to do something. I think that's just the humane, appropriate thing to do. Now, what happens after you make a call or report something to Childline? So that is usually, it depends on the state, but in my state of Pennsylvania, you can go online to Childline, make reports, and what they do with that is out of your hands. And believe me, I've seen what happens with those reports. The amount of evidence you need to get a child removed from a home is egregious. They basically have to be close to death to, in this state anyway, to get children removed from the home. And so the system is very broken, and it's really sad. But my point is that it doesn't matter what other people do with it. We have to say something, because, like I said, Gypsy was failed at every step and every turn. They also interviewed a woman, she was a doctor named Beatrice Yorker, PhD, who was an expert on Munchausen Syndrome, which is, again, now called Factitious Disorder. And she had a lot of really interesting things to say, which I appreciated. So I'm going to talk about that. And then the last person, oh gosh, this is so awful. And you know what? I'm going to also right now, I'm sorry, trigger warning. I am going to be talking about, right now, I'm going to be talking about allegations of sexual abuse. And I apologize that I didn't get that at the top of the show. Like I said, little off kilter today. So they interviewed Gypsy Rose's maternal grandfather, the Claude Petrie. I'm not sure how you say it. So Claude, and then the other gentleman on the side of that family, Bobby, there was a cousin, and Evans was DeeDee's brother and Gypsy's uncle. So those are the people that they interviewed. And one of the most astounding things that came from this interview is they were interviewing Claude, which was her grandfather, about, Gypsy used to spend time there so DeeDee was in a car accident, okay, when Gypsy was 9 years old. And it was really, really severe. She actually almost lost her leg. And while DeeDee was in the hospital, Gypsy Rose stayed with her grandfather, Claude. And Gypsy Rose stated, and I'm going to state this as fact because we need to believe victims, because the amount of victim blaming and shaming, especially online, has gotten out of control. Okay. Gypsy Rose says that when she was staying with her grandfather, he was sexually abusive to her the entire time that DeeDee was in the hospital. The interviewer confronted him about this allegation, and he denied it, of course, and blamed Gypsy Rose for trying to touch him. Mm-hmm. So that just gave me blind rage, because you're going to blame a 9-year-old? Okay. Mm-hmm. So I am grateful that the interviewer called him out on this, and I am hoping that after this, there is something that is done about that. Now, Gypsy Rose, in one of her interviews, was told about this confrontation. And Gypsy Rose, I have it in my notes, but she said something to the effect of, I would have forgiven him had he admitted it and apologized, but I cannot move forward, at this point. And it's like, of course. Unfortunately, sometimes we do have to, as adults, learn how to heal and move forward from people who we're never going to get an apology from. And that's a very painful, very hard process. It can be done. But Gypsy's not in that space now, and that's okay. I hope she just knows and realizes that it is possible to move forward to get peace for herself. But this, it was just awful. And so the last thing I'm going to say about this is that Gypsy Rose told her mother, so DeeDee, this was her dad, right? She told her mom about what happened, and she cried and she blamed herself, and then they just never discussed it again. So here's what this tells me, is that DeeDee was likely also a victim of sexual abuse. And so the reason why I start the podcast with this and I share this groundwork is that it is hard to have empathy for people who do egregious things like DeeDee did to Gypsy. But I always, as a therapist, we are trained to see the humanity behind the behavior, right? And so part of my job is to say, okay, what created DeeDee? And how how that led to Gypsy Rose being in this dysfunction and abusive cycle. And so my belief is that, in fact, I'm gonna read this right now, is that we did get a little look into DeeDee Blanchard's childhood, and there were some interesting tidbits that I'll share with you. Is that according to the uncle who was interviewed, DeeDee was her mom's favorite. And here's what's really fascinating. DeeDee herself was a sick child who was enmeshed with her own mother. So I'm going to explain what enmeshed means. When we rely on our caregivers because we have either mental health issues, physical health issues, and our parents are our caretakers, there are ways that relationship can become overly close or codependent or inappropriate. And so it is my belief that this is the seedling that sprouted DeeDee's later behaviors, which are truly unforgivable. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. But I did just want to outline, some people are just born, I believe, and people who are experts in psychopathology, their brains are different. Brain scans show that some people born with sociopathy or psychopathology, there are physical parts of their brain that are underdeveloped, the parts that, manage empathy and impulse control and all of these other things, right? So there are some people that it's born, and then there's some people that they may have had a bit of that, and then the epigenetics, which is where genes meet environment, you have something that happens in your environment, and then it turns on that gene, okay? So I do believe that the childhood stuff with her, DeeDee being a sick child, seeing the attention maybe that her mom got, or seeing the attention that she got, and then the enmeshment with her mother, it just created this dysfunctional relational system that DeeDee then ended up not only passing down to Gypsy Rose, but also just taking it in a wholly other direction. Okay, so what exactly am I talking about with what happened? Let me fill you in about that. So from the age that Gypsy was born until maybe, I think, about 5 years old, her father wasn't in her life anymore. And so a lot of this started after the separation between her mom and her dad, and it started kind of slowly and incrementally. And as all things do, like this, it just completely spun out of control. Like when you're lying about your child's health to get medical attention, lies in general, lies just chase lies and chase lies and chase lies. And after a while, you just can't keep track of them. So it's not sustainable. And situations like this always implode. However, Gypsy Rose is the first case ever recorded of a victim of Munchausen Syndrome by proxy, which is now called Factitious Disorder imposed on another. She is the first and only documented case of a person who is a victim of that killing her abuser. She's the only case. And what that tells me is how severe the trauma and the situation was. And in my belief, this wasn't just about a factitious disorder. There were other more nefarious things at play. And I'm going to be mindful about how I talk about this because, I have to be. And, DeeDee is no longer with us. She, Gypsy and Gypsy's boyfriend, they murdered her. And that is why she was in jail. But I'm going to explain what led up to it, because I think that, the first thing that I wrote here was Gypsy Rose victim or villain. And usually people are a little bit of both. But in my estimation, Gypsy Rose, after watching all her interviews, seeing her on 2020 Dateline, watching all of this, she is 100% a victim. 100%. She owns her stuff, and I'm going to talk about that more in a bit, because I was really uncomfortable with, when she got released from prison, she was on social media immediately, and people were like standing her, like a stan is, like an obsessed fan. And I just was like, not sure. I'm like, this seems odd to me, and it feels kind of icky. And so after I watched everything, I get it now. I'm like, oh, okay. She deserves all that love and support. So here's essentially kind of how this worked, is that DeeDee was starting, prior to the instances of faking Gypsy Rose's medical issues, she struggled with financial fraud, passing bad checks. She had been in jail, or at least had a mugshot one time. She had a side to her, and this was featured in the documentary, which is she once put Roundup in her stepmother's food, which Gypsy casually mentioned it. And then after this, the family exiled her, and then the abuse got worse. So let me be clear. After Gypsy Rose's dad left, they were close with DeeDee's family. Okay, so her dad was remarried to her stepmother, who clearly she hated. Gypsy Rose was young at the time, and she saw her mom put Roundup in the food, and she just innocently made a comment. And then once they realized what was happening, they were banished from the family, which, the problem with that is, in situations like this, you're going to see an increasing amount of isolation, right? At first, it starts out, there's family, there's doctors, there's support. And then by the end of this, there's usually just the victim and the perpetrator. And the perpetrator makes it that way. So this was one way that DeeDee, it was a step towards being manipulative and having her Gypsy Rose all to herself. And unfortunately, the stepmother, her name was Laura, she did die a slow, painful death, because Roundup has been proven to cause cancer, like proven, absolutely. Even when you like spray it outside in your yard. So, of course, ingesting it would have created, awful medical issues. So, I found that really interesting. And then all of a sudden, DeeDee, you really alienated Gypsy Rose from her dad by lying about abuse. So DeeDee told Gypsy that her dad was abusive to her as a child. So she filled Gypsy's head with, your dad is abusive. He left us. I'm the one who takes care of you. So that's parental alienation. And again, that serves to isolate so that DeeDee can just continue to just be, do all this stuff and get what she wants. So there was a huge turning point in how this got so out of control, which was Hurricane Katrina. So the family, Gypsy, her mom, and her dad, they all lived in something parish, Louisiana. I'm sorry, I didn't write it down exactly. So after Hurricane Katrina, they relocated to a different state, and they moved from Louisiana to Missouri. And DeeDee never told anybody that they moved. So DeeDee took the opportunity to say, okay, well, Hurricane Katrina, they lost a lot of their stuff. She used it as an opportunity to relocate to Missouri, where there was no family, and she could see different doctors. Doctor shopping is a huge red flag of this type of behavior. So for months, Gypsy Rose's dad and stepmom were like looking for her. And then finally, after 4 months, she, DeeDee told them where they were. And then at this point, the dad just stopped being involved because they were far away, and he just thought DeeDee was doing a great job. But here's where this gets really wild, is that because of Hurricane Katrina, DeeDee was the only reliable reporter, quote unquote, because she claimed all the medical records were gone. And you will see this in situations like this where it's like, well, how does this happen? And especially for me, right? Because I have a million medical issues, and I have literally boxes of medical records. I'm not joking. I have like an entire organizational space dedicated to boxes of medical records. And, you know, it would have been easy, especially years ago. Not now, everything is electronic, but back then, you know, it was easier to get away with that stuff. So it honestly, it just was like these little life events ping-ponged and came together to create this bonfire of horror and trauma. So let's see what else we have here. Okay, so let me give you the long and the short of it in terms of what exactly happened and what DeeDee was lying about. Let me get my papers here. Okay, so the first thing that is wild that DeeDee lied about was her age. So this is similar to the curious case of Natalia Grace, which I'm also going to cover. But there's always, like, when it's stuff like that, there's always like lying about age, and you wonder, like, why? But again, it's so to garner more, you know, empathy, support, right? Because like when you're a child and you have cancer, so I am a cancer survivor when I was 17. So I was technically a child, but almost an adult, right? So when you're young and you have cancer and you're bald, you get a lot of attention. When you're older and you don't look as sick, nobody cares. So I think that, you know, DeeDee kind of used that to her advantage, because listen, she was a smart person. I mean, these people who do these evil things, if they, I always joke, like, if they put all of that time and energy into doing something good, they could probably cure cancer, but that's just not the way their brains work. So DeeDee lied about Gypsy's age. She told her she was 4 years younger than she actually was. And so Gypsy literally was like, she was 19 years old and she thought she was 15. And it was wild. And so one of the doctors also talked about how she had like 3 different birth dates in the system, which again, it's like, it's crazy to me how this kind of stuff can happen, but it does. So that was a huge thing. So she also said that the first thing that DeeDee said was that Gypsy Rose was having seizures. Okay. And then she realized the attention and support that she got from that. So then she claimed that she was, well, it said in the documentary, mentally challenged, but really developmentally disabled, is, you know, the more appropriate term. So, and that's couldn't be further from the truth at all. DeeDee claimed that Gypsy had hearing and visual impairments. So I'm reading you the list as the timeline, and you can see how it ramps up, right? So then it was, she has muscular dystrophy requiring use of a wheelchair. Okay. Then it went to, she has leukemia, which, by the way, I am so annoyed that, so I have leukemia and it's like the cancer du jour. It's like when people fake stuff, there have been a couple of these other cases of women who have like faked cancer, which, you know, I'll probably cover that too, but it's always leukemia. And it's like, that is so offensive and rude. I don't know. I just get personally offended by that. So DeeDee started shaving her head and told Gypsy that she had leukemia, and she told everybody else that she had leukemia. Here's one thing I am going to, just like a little nugget. If you are concerned that someone is faking a cancer diagnosis, Brooks and Vicky, if you're concerned about that, shaving your head is not what it looks like. Like when you lose your hair, you lose it at the root. So you don't have like stubble. Like when you shave your head, you can see there's hair. There's like stubble, whatever it is. When you lose your hair from treatment, it is bald as a baby's bottom. You might have a few little wispies here and there, but it looks wholly different. So I'm just putting that out there because if you know someone or you are questioning this, that is a telltale sign that it's something ain't right. Something ain't right. And also, if people are bald or have a shaved head but have like real eyebrows and like real hair on their body, that is also like a red flag. Because typically, I mean, there are new ways to do things, and you can cold cap and you can keep your hair and all these things. But I'm just saying, in terms of consistency, people who lie and who fake these things, they don't usually know how to do the whole shebang. So that's also kind of just like a heads up. Okay, so after the leukemia diagnosis, she got a feeding tube, which is a very, very common aspect of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, because ultimately Munchausen syndrome and factitious disorder, well, I'm going to talk about the psychology, but it's always about controlling what goes into your child's body, because you're poisoning them and you're making them sick. And so a feeding tube is the best way to do that. And it gets a lot of empathy from people. The expert on this, she said, and I do know this to be true as well, this is common in almost all aspects of factitious disorder imposed on another. It gives parents unlimited control to poison, medicate, starve, or feed their child. And so, if Gypsy Rose didn't behave as her mom wanted her to, she would starve her. And she could do that because of the tube. So that's wild. Gypsy Rose, so then it goes to, she had salivary glands and her teeth removed. Today, Gypsy Rose only has 16 teeth. Like when you see her and you smile and she has some like metal and some dental work, it's because her mother had basically all of her teeth removed for no reason. And in fact, with the salivary gland issue, Gypsy Rose talked about how her mom would like coat her lips and her mouth in Orajel, which is like an analgesic, and it's used to numb, and it would create drooling. And so she literally had salivary glands removed that weren't supposed to be removed. They play a very important role in dental health and a lot of other things. And so, unfortunately, Gypsy wasn't sick, but she is now going to have to deal with issues for the rest of her life because of these procedures that she was forced to go through. And the last one that is so wild to me is she had a neck procedure to examine why her voice was so high. And this is what really, really irritates me, is that for those of you who listen to my episodes about Paris in Love, the baby voice is a trauma response, okay? DeeDee infantilized Gypsy, right? And this is all Gypsy knew. And so this voice is it's an indicator of trauma. It's an indicator of being developmentally stuck. There were doctors that said, Gypsy looked older, but it was like she had the mental capacity and the voice of like a 4-year-old. So that was also how DeeDee would get away with making Gypsy Rose seem developmentally disabled, because she was presenting as that. She presented as way, way, way younger than her age, because DeeDee kind of forced the princess thing on her. Like DeeDee wanted her to be that stereotypical child with cancer who goes to Disney and gets free trips and wears the princess stuff. And it was all a role. It was all an act. It was literally like a uniform, and it was an act. And so the important thing that I want to get to is the the specifics about the Munchausen syndrome and all of that. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about Gypsy Rose and, why I do believe that she is truly a victim and all of that. So let me see here. Okay. So DeeDee, her diagnosis, according to the experts being interviewed and, everyone in the medical community, is that factitious disorder imposed on another. And I will explain briefly. So Munchausen syndrome, the name came from a man named, his name was Baron Munchausen. And the term was coined in 1951 because Baron Munchausen was a narrator of false and exaggerated tales. So the name Munchausen syndrome wasn't descriptive about what the disorder is. It was just kind of like a shady shot at this wild guy who just clearly was a liar and just made a whole bunch of stuff up. So because of this, the new name is factitious disorder imposed on another, because it's just more accurate and more specific. And I didn't even know that. I did a lot of research on this and I was like, oh, okay, that makes total sense, right? So you'll find I use the terms interchangeably because I have always known it as Munchausen syndrome. But so factitious disorder, you can have either factitious disorder where you make yourself sick to garner attention, or it could be imposed on another. So it's an adult usually doing it to a child, to their child, to, get the attention. Okay. But there are some important nuances here that I think that this was way more than factitious disorder because, okay, let me explain. Factitious disorder is a mental illness classified as a somatic symptom disorder, which is also called a somatoform disorder for anyone who's, I do have people who are in school who follow me, so this is for you. Everyone else is probably like, who cares? People with factitious disorder exaggerate or lie about symptoms, but without intent for a concrete benefit. And that is why this is important, because for DeeDee, there were clearly concrete benefits. For example, all of the stuff I'm going to tell you right now, here's what they received. Okay. Here is the benefits that this woman received. They got a new home from Habitat for Humanity, a new home built for them, with the, the wheelchair accessibility, and it was like a ranch. It was it was to be accessible for them. She got so many free wheelchairs, which Gypsy didn't need because none of this was true, and just other medical equipment. And in fact, when interviewers went to the house, they found a closet of medications. For those of you who are Real Housewives fan, think of Yolanda Foster. Remember when she was dealing with Lyme disease and Lisa Rinna claimed that it was Munchausen syndrome, which, by the way, is the reason to this day I can't stand Lisa Rinna, because it was just the most atrociously gross storyline. And as a person with chronic illness, I could barely even watch it. But this woman had a medication cabinet with she had a stolen prescription pad, and B, the wildest thing was the house was hoarded. It was disorganized. It was hoarded, but this medical cabinet was beyond organized. And that is so indicative, right, of where this woman's mental health was at and where her pathology was at. That just says so much, right? So they got multiple Disney trips from multiple type of Make-A-Wish type foundations. And again, I was able to make a wish as a child because I wasn't supposed to survive my cancer. If you're interested in hearing more about that, season 1, I have an episode called The One Where Your Bish, or The One Where I Tell My Story. It's something like that, where I talk about, I got to make a wish through Make-A-Wish Foundation. I met the cast of Friends. I had a really wonderful interaction with Matthew Perry. And so I tell the whole story of that. So if you're interested, go back and listen. But as someone who was the recipient of something like that, it just makes me so angry because it's like so expensive and people give their time and their money. And it's just there's taking advantage of people, and then there's taking advantage of people. And some of this is just like so gross, because that was a wish that a child who was really dying didn't get. And, you know, it just really upsets me. She got thousands of dollars in cash from family and friends. Specifically Gypsy's dad. He always was sending money because he really was trying to be supportive. The Leukemia and Lymphoma Society gifted them a laptop, which here's what's so interesting. So DeeDee tried to really isolate Gypsy, and this laptop was the thing that started the whole process of DeeDee's death. Got her being able to go on the internet, realizing she could talk to people, realizing, she could talk to boys. And that is how she met Nick, the person who did kill her mom. And that's how she planned the whole thing. And then that's how she announced to the world on Facebook. The quote was, "The bitch is dead." So it's wild that it was a gift from the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, but it eventually led to her freedom. I don't know. It's just very interesting to me. And I'm going to say I've been dealing with cancer over half my life. I never got anything gifted to me from Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. So if you want to send me something, please hit me up. No, I'm just kidding. Other people need it more than me. I'm just being silly. Movie theater tickets, just endless amounts of stuff that she got. Okay. So factitious disorder in and of itself is not the whole story, in my opinion. Now, there's something called malingering, which is the intentional fabrication of medical symptoms for the purpose of external gain. Along similar lines as malingering, factitious disorder is the intentional creation or exaggeration of symptoms, but without the intent for concrete benefit. So my point is, there was something additional that DeeDee had going on, because it was clearly there was a grifter kind of approach to it as well. It wasn't just for the attention and the love. It was to get stuff so that DeeDee didn't have to work and, all that stuff. So malingerers will engage in many of the same activities as people with factitious disorder. They exaggerate or make up symptoms of an illness, either physical or psychiatric, whereas factitious disorder is a mental health condition with no clear cause, which the cause to me is love, support, attention, right? We all need that, and sometimes we just don't know how to get it. So sometimes that's how these things happen. But malingerers do it for personal gain. They have clear external motivations that drive their behavior, such as insurance fraud, getting time off work, reducing work obligations, getting prescriptions for controlled meds, which here's why this is important. Gypsy Rose ended up developing an addiction to pain medications because her mother was using the prescription pad to get these pain medications for herself. And Gypsy Rose eventually started taking them. And one of the things that she was open about, which I really appreciated, was when she got to jail, she was addicted to, I believe it was Vicodin. I'm not sure. It was an opiate. It was a controlled substance. So malingering itself is not a mental illness. In some cases, however, people who adopt malingering behavior do have a mental illness. And here's an example. Okay, I'm just going to use an example. Antisocial personality disorder. People with antisocial personality disorder exploit people and laws for personal or financial gain, which can include malingering behavior. Okay. So that's as far as I'm going to go with that thread, but you all can hear and understand what it is that I'm saying. So common characteristics of factitious disorder imposed on another. Again, I'll just reiterate. The object most important to them is the person who is the focus. doctor shopping, going to the ends of the earth to cover their lives, feeding tubes, isolation from family and loved ones, extensive but inconsistent medical history in the patient, perhaps with symptoms that don't seem to correlate, which that's what all the doctors said. It's like she would say she had these issues, but then they could tell that clearly she didn't. Frequent cycles of reporting improvement and worsening of symptoms, tendency to evade questions and change providers when a health professional is exploring causes other than a diagnosable condition. And that was one of the things. One of the doctors did confront DeeDee about that. And of course, she just like never talked to that person again and then just like moved away. Eagerness to have multiple medical examinations or procedure performed on the proxy. So for me, this is where this becomes the most atrocious abuse, because as someone who has I have gone through the most painful, awful medical procedures. I've had 12 plus hour surgeries, multiple biopsies, chemotherapy, immunotherapy, bone marrow biopsy, like without sedation. I have been through it. Going through those tests is torture, but I need to do it, right? So to find out that you literally had a healthy body, which now is no longer going to be healthy because of the medical stuff she made you go through. So number one, it's losing her real health, which she always had. And B, understanding the torture that was inflicted upon you for absolutely no reason. Like if I found out that my parents put me through that and I actually wasn't sick, I honestly don't know what I would have done. Truly. I mean, I just need people to understand it's not like she just said she had these things. She forced Gypsy to go surgery after surgery after surgery, teeth removal, medications. Like it was really, really egregious. Okay. So DeeDee needed Gypsy to be sick and compliant because in my opinion, DeeDee was very unwell and needed Gypsy to be her everything all the time. And so, that's what she created. She created this child who was completely dependent upon her. And here's the thing. Here's what I'm going to say about Gypsy Rose. So when I watched the interviews, I watched her verbal, I listened to her verbal, what she was saying, but I also watched her nonverbals. And I can tell you that this person is owning her actions authentically, consistently, and humbly. And to me, that shows that, yes, did Gypsy, were there other ways? Now she knows that she could have, done things different. Yes. But what I need people to understand, including herself, because she knows she has a lifetime of trauma work to do, which I'm glad that she does know that. When your parent or your caregiver has such an enmeshed codependent relationship with you that your survival depends on having them in your life, how quick do you think you would be to give that up? Her dad's not in her life, and Gypsy thinks, well, he just doesn't want anything to do with me. He's abusive too. My grandfather was abusive. All I have is my mother, right? So it's the psychological, emotional trauma impact. It's indescribable. It's absolutely out of control. If people say to Gypsy, well, why didn't you get up? Why didn't you stand up? Because she could always stand and walk. She never had any issues. And when she later realized it, she just trusted her mom and thought, well, she wouldn't, there must be some reason for this. So imagine, she's a teenager. She's found the internet. She's found boys. She's realizing and really this is where the wheels fell off for DeeDee, because all young kids grow up. And when they grow up, there are developmentally appropriate sexual desires and urges and feelings and all these things. And so what happens when we don't teach our kids about that is it gets acted out inappropriately. And so DeeDee was just trying to make sure that Gypsy Rose knew that nobody would ever love her. In fact, there was like this very bizarre moment where Gypsy Rose talked about how after she ran away from home like a couple of times, and once she came back, because what is Gypsy supposed to do? She has no support. She has no money. Where was she supposed to go? DeeDee knew what she was doing. Okay. She made her completely dependent upon her. And when Gypsy Rose came back, she was tortured. She was beaten. She was starved. And DeeDee did this like very bizarre ritual with like taking her menstrual blood and putting it in a jar and doing a hex. Like DeeDee kind of fancied herself a witch or something. And listen, for people who are listening to this that are Wiccan, it's not, that's not what being a witch is. We all know that, but like some people look at it in a dark, really sinister way. And I think DeeDee did. And so she told Gypsy Rose, like, I'm doing this curse on you and you will never find love. Okay. So we all need to understand the insanity that Gypsy Rose went through mentally. So it wasn't just as easy as standing up and saying, hey, I can walk. What was she going to do if her mom went to jail? Right? So it's like, yes, murder, never, acceptable. There are things she could have done, but psychologically, I'm just explaining why that didn't happen. Okay. I'm trying to think. Okay, I'm going to share a couple of quotes and observations before wrapping it up. So one of the quotes that Gypsy Rose said is that therapy is essential to my betterment, which tell me she truly understands the severity of the work that she's going to need to do. So it shows me that she was severely neglected because like she's looking for help and support. So when you have people who are looking for help and support, and like love and like true help, those are often people who have been neglected, right? They've not had the ability to say, no, you know what? I don't need therapy. Like they don't have that, because when you're neglected emotionally, you're just like, I will listen to, or I will talk to someone who will listen and who will validate. And the way that she talked about it, so she said, everyone could see the desperation I had, and that's why I chose to commit murder. So what I love about the way that she's talking about it is like, she's owning it. She's like, I made a choice, and it was not a good choice. It was a choice that I wish I could have done differently. Is this really what I wanted? Realizing she kind of traded one abuser for another, with a boyfriend at the time. And so it's very complex, but I appreciate that she's like authentically and humbly owning her stuff. Okay. The one thing she said that I thought was super interesting was she said, I wish I stood up for myself more. And so as a therapist, I think that is a literal and figurative statement. She wishes she literally just stood up at an appointment and was like, this is a sham. I can walk, all these things. But she didn't know how to do it. She didn't have the resources and skills. She was being treated like a child. So she had the emotional intelligence of a child, right? She talked about, having a history of tumultuous relationships, and she was engaged a couple times, and now she met this guy through he wrote her a letter, and I might actually do another episode about that. Everyone has concerns. Like you went from being in your mom's house, being treated like a child, to literally going to prison after killing her. So she went from being infantilized to being an adult overnight, which it was interesting. She said the best day of her life was going to prison because she finally felt free. And that alone told me that she was a victim. Like, who goes to prison and is like, oh, thank God, this is amazing, I'm free? But someone who's been through some real shit, let me tell you. So the fact that jail offered her freedom, and really it was transitional housing for her, because it was like she had to be an adult overnight. She went from thinking she was this infantilized child to being treated like an adult in a court of law and in jail. So, she learned how to be socialized in jail, which, I wonder what kind of effects that will have on her. And everyone was concerned about this marriage to this gentleman. But I'm going to say something similar to what I said about Paris, is that Gypsy Rose has more than earned the right to make her own decisions. And she's going to need to make decisions and make mistakes and learn like everybody else. We cannot save her from that. So do I have concerns about this relationship? I do. She's still looking for a knight in shining armor, and she needs to realize she is her own knight in shining armor, or whatever the female version of a knight is. I don't know. But she needs to learn that for herself, right? But it's also understandable that she wants love and companionship. So I send Gypsy all the love and support in the world. I just, hope that she really does the work so that she can get to a place of moving forward from the trauma and understanding how it impacts her. Because knowing you have trauma is one thing, and then working on it so that you can treat yourself and others differently, that's a whole other ballgame, and that's really hard. But it seems like Gypsy Rose totally understood, this is going to be hard for me. She said, I wish I didn't have to commit the crime. I wish I could have asked someone who could really help. I needed a way out of my reality. And so I think, the one last thing she said is, at the end of the day, I'm a murderer. And I just feel that, that is such a challenging thing for her to navigate, right? Because it's like, you did this thing, but psychologically and trauma-wise, like, you were a victim. So it's like, how to manage that. I just send her a lot of love and support, and I hope that she, is able to find someone great to really help her. Let me see if I missed anything else. Regarding her relationship, one thing I wanted to say is just that she is developmentally stunted, right? She went from being a child to now being an adult overnight. And so when she has these tumultuous times in her relationship, I believe it is because of the trauma that she experienced with her mom. She doesn't know how to have a healthy relationship. She doesn't know how to trust people. She doesn't, it's going to take her time to figure that out. And her lying at this point, it's like she tells half truths, which it serves two functions. Is I think it's a conditioned trauma response, right? Because all DeeDee taught her to do was lie. So it's a conditioned trauma response, but it's also because, she thinks if people know the whole truth, she won't get unconditional love. Like, we have to remember, she just never had unconditional love. So going back to her parents, Rod and Christy Blanchard, it ended very lovely in terms of they were so supportive and so wonderful and told her, we love you unconditionally and we will never stop being here for you. And I just think that is a beautiful thing. So that is going to be it for this episode. I appreciate you all so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you for your continued support. And I just wish you nothing but the best. And please remember to take care of yourselves and each other. Disclaimer: posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Bish Therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and posts are my own and are not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Greyheart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT podcast and on its social media is provided for general or informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, or hear on YBT podcast or associated social media. Communicating with YBT via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback.